Hi, this is Henry Chamberlain. Welcome to Comics Grinder. I've got M. Jacob Alvarez. He's a longtime cartoonist. He just was at the Small Press Expo, so we'll chat about that and among other things. So thanks for being here with me, Jake.
Thank you very much for having me.
Cool. Well, like I was telling you before we started, we can look at some of your comics, and maybe I should just give the floor over to you first, and you can introduce yourself. How would you like to introduce yourself? Somebody just came across and was interested in chatting with you at a comics convention.
I mean, I wish I had a better answer for it. If I could specialize a little bit more, I'd probably be more popular. But I've been drawing comics my whole life, and I really can't nail down a genre. I've drawn romance comics, I've drawn gag comics, I've drawn action comics. My most popular ones currently are I've been doing a bunch of book review comics.
This is one of your romance comics, and it's a sizable. It's like a full-length graphic novel. You know, sometimes the shorter ones actually hit the nail on the head just right. Yours is just a little over 80 pages. And I remember this being quite a delightful book. Really social satire, skewers the hipster scene a little bit here and there, and just a fun story. Does that take you back? Do you want to do something like this again, maybe in the future, or was this your one-time foray into this type of work?
Oh no, I would love to revisit something with a little more emotional depth. I mean, all of my story comics have some level of emotional depth, but the most recent kind of manga inspired, kung fu comic obviously has a lot less on the surface than a romance between two really messed up 20 somethings. Um, as far as a longer work that tackles those things, I've been kind of obsessed with modularity recently. In that, I did Chinatown Bus when I was 30. I was like, all right, I better do a graphic novel now if I ever want to do one because, no one's really waiting on me for this. Um, it takes you years to finish something like that. I actually just finished a prose novel. It's going to be called Star Touched, that was meant to be the script for the new graphic novel. The script totally grew out of control. I realized it would take me 10 to 20 years to draw it. So I just turned it into a prose novel, and hopefully that'll be out soon. But recently I've been thinking about stories where you can draw 12 to 16 pages or maybe even a full 32-page issue. And I can do that in a year or two. And each of them will be a satisfying story, but they stack up into a longer story. So, I don't have to wait 20 years before releasing my next work, but I will eventually get to another graphic novel, or in the case of the book review comics, a nice big hefty hardcover is what I'm eventually hoping for those.
Well, that's really exciting to hear. I think of all sorts of hybrid creatives, people who they just can't help but want to do a prose work. I think of Ariel Schrag, for instance, just to name one person. So yeah, I think if the story really calls for it to be prose, then why not?
Well, comics are hard, but they teach you a lot of stuff. You learn to write, you learn to draw, and you learn to do calligraphy. I guess some of mine's on display right there with the
Yeah.
new Atheist Guide to the Old Testament. And you can practice all of those by their own. Like I said, the prose novel, I've done some painting before. Comics actually took me to doing a little bit of improv and stand-up comedy to help script gag comics. And that goes back to the comics, but it's also, I performed on stage because of what comics took me to.
Yeah. Well, now the Old Testament, I mean, you really have set yourself up for quite a lot of work to decipher it and to bring it into concise form. And it's the story of humanity that they are exiled into Babylon and then promised the promised land and then back to Babylon and the promised land again. And what can you tell us about what inspired you to take on such a task?
I mean, it's in the very first panel. I'm the type of jerk who, well, the Bible is the foundational document of Western culture. I should probably read that. And good God, it took me like 3 years to do, but there really are a lot of things that just make more sense about the world, even as it is right now. When you've read the Bible totally through. I finished this in 2022. It took SPX to make me print it up, partially because the novel that I finished and I've been trying to sell also has religious themes, so I was trying to sell them as a pair, but I'm running off in a different direction. But regardless, it was before the whole Israel Palestine thing blew up again, as it always does every couple years. And oh my God, these every side's viewpoint on that makes so much more sense, when you know actually what they're reading and what they're trying to get back to. I don't want to go too far on that one, but let me give you a better example. You always wonder when you're, there's a question that smart kids who like to read Vonnegut ask. It's how could the same book be so beloved by both slave owners and slaves, or people who have experienced that? How can the same book touch them in different ways, but be so important to both such groups? And the answer is because, the ancient Israelis were both colonizers. There were always people in Canaan when they got there, and they kicked them the hell out. And also, they were conquered by the Assyrians and the Babylonians and carted off to slavery for hundreds, almost thousands of years before they were allowed to return. So it's a little less dry here. I make it funny. I give you all the battles and all the stuff so you don't have to read through Deuteronomy. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that just makes so much more sense when you've gone through the Bible. And there's one right there.
Yeah.
Joshua sends his book slaughtering natives like some psychotic cowboy. And trust me, I'm pretty apolitical as far as this stuff goes, but it's right there in black and white. So that's why I wanted to read it, and it did not disappoint.
No, you really get into a nice conversational tone with it, and after a few pages, I just couldn't help but read it all the way through. At first, the material itself is daunting, but if you just allow yourself to get into the type of world you've created, I think by page 10, I was hooked.
My ears are burning. You're so kind. Thank you so much. I wish I could. I wish that the ride through the Bible had been that pleasant for me. But then you get to those points, you're like, that the little nuggets in there, that the marshmallows in the Lucky Charms that help you keep going. So I've given you an "Oops, all marshmallows" version of the Old Testament.
Yeah, I should have highlighted page 10 in my review, but I think that one it is compositionally everything falls into place, and the little jokey stuff. Does this guy know I'm supposed to kill him? I think this is a really, really nice panel all by itself right there. Uh, but it's a gem all the way through.
Thank you so much. I was using a bunch of techniques here. Every cartoonist is a lifelong student, but
Yeah.
this is when I really started to understand the purpose of light, shadow, and grayscale a little bit more. I'm self-taught. I studied engineering in school. Thank you very much, Evan Dorkin, for telling me it was hard to make a living doing comics.
Yeah.
But when you just learn how to be a cartoonist without anyone telling you how, you are so focused on line work and outline, and you wonder why your work looks so flat. And then about 2015, I started painting again for the first time since high school. I think I just found a cheap set of paints at Blick or something. It's like, this might be fun for a weekend. And once you start putting like light and shadow, everything rounds out, and there's just so much more compositional. You can do so much more with it. You've got options, and it just looks better.
Yeah, I'm listening, very enjoying what you're saying, and I think about this panel, for instance, and the light and the play of light and shadow, and I think about how we're old enough now where we think Back in the old days when the dinosaurs were roaming around, everybody was self-taught, because it wasn't a thing yet. But now it's become a thing where you can just focus on comics. So the younger generation, they can stand on the shoulders of giants and cherry pick things, techniques, ways of drawing, basically swiping stuff from some cartoonists not that long past, from 10 years ago. And so you learning it the hard way, I think that you're going to have uh, this generation or generations yet to come that they'll be swiping stuff from you someday. You just never
Once
know.
more, uh, uh, as it says in the Quran, inshallah, if God wills it, that would be very nice. I don't want to speak ill about the current generation because I
No, no,
love a
no,
lot of
no,
cartoons,
no.
and there's just such an amazing level of talent now because you can go to comics college. But I do miss that self-taught kind of outlaw comics thing because when you teach yourself, everyone looks different. You know what I mean? And there definitely is a sameness to when you learn to do it in college. Obviously you get this insane talent because the practice and everything you can, but there's also that lineage where everyone who learns to draw by themselves looks different and interesting, even if it's bad. And I see all of the flaws in my work, and I'm also not putting my self up to that. But yeah, indie comics art is always, even when it's bad, it's interesting.
Yeah, that's a better way to put it. I mean, younger people can do it any way they want. I mean, you could be a self-taught 20-year-old. I mean, there's so many different ways to go about it.
And we also don't know the true the legends of now. I heard a filmmaker I like once say they should hold the Oscars 10 years after the year that they're talking about because you don't know what has impact until then. Like, had you asked someone in, maybe this is a bad example, but like, 1990, would they have said Jaime Hernandez? Maybe because he's so great, but would they have said, me think of a better example of I don't know if you'd have said Daniel Clowes in 1990 is really the person who's going to come out of this. It takes time for to sift the gold from the sand, you know.
Yeah. Well, the first Oscars were 2 years after the movies that they were awarding. I think Wings had come out 2 years prior, so it gave them some time to digest, and then from then on, it was blah, 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 year after year.
So we really just have to get back to that.
It might help. You're right.
Just talking about we were talking about techniques earlier. Something I was doing lately with this comic that I really like is textures in the inks. Um, when you're a kid and you see, say, Jim Lee or something like that, who everyone of a certain generation started off on. I was always more of a Gary Larson / Bill Watterson guy. But, you see all that detail and you want to draw the detail. And one of the coolest things I learned recently, well, when I did this back in, the early pandemic, is that the detail doesn't so matter much as the detail gives you a gray tone. And depending on it's all a gray tone, but you can use different ones to make things feel different. Like if you notice, whenever I draw fabric, I'm either drawing paisley because it kind of makes it look like a couch, like the lady's dress, or I've got like this burlap pattern that I use, such on the guy's shirt right there. And it still gives the impression of gray, but it just gives you a little bit different. That's made of something else, and that really tickles me to get to use it. Well, so I've actually considered, well, check this out. This is the best art book that I have on drawing in pen and ink. Really hammers that home about composition and texture and everything like that. It's called Rendering in Pen and Ink by Arthur Guptill. It's reasonably old. I've actually considered starting doing TikTok because everyone's got to be on TikTok now if you want to promote yourself.
Sure.
Doing one of just reviews of art instructional books because I buy them impulsively, as I'm sure a lot of artists do. And some of them
Yeah.
are really cool. I brought so definitely check out Rendering in Pen and Ink by Arthur Gut-Patel if you want to ink traditionally. I know a lot of people just do the computer or do pencils now, but this is probably the weirdest and coolest one I've got. It's a Japanese book called How to Draw Like an American, except it's in Japanese. And it's all for people who are doing like Thundercats cartoons in the 80s. Like, this is what Americans really like. But like a lot of things, it's cool, but they like don't quite get it. It still looks very manga-y. And
Oh, I love that.
I've never drawn from this one, but I maybe pick it up and page through it every every couple months. It's a whole lot of fun. Oh, this one especially is like, yeah, I think I remember seeing those some of those Saturday morning cartoons.
Yeah, well, whatever gets the job done, I think you just have to find that right balance. If you're swiping something like completely from somebody else, you need to say, well, with apologies too, when it comes to that. But
Of course.
to each his own, I suppose. But
Well, I'm not much of a swipe person, but as artists, we're all looking for inspiration. And sometimes it just seeing something you like gives you the energy to work on a new project.
yeah,
But my dad's a writer. He's not a visual artist, and he has a line he always says: "Everyone steals, the good steal well."
yeah, and there's that other famous line, still like an artist or whatever it is. They kind of get a little too slick for me sometimes just hearing that. But you know when you've taken it too far, when you swipe something and you've gone too far. But if you're inspired by something, and that can be like your jumping off point, that's the best way to do it, I guess.
I agree. But there's also inspiration from things that you didn't like, which leads into. I mean, I've got so many projects. Once I finish up what I'm doing now, you've got to finish projects as an artist. But the next book review comic is going to be J.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Ring
Oh,
versus Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungens.
oh my goodness.
Well, I mean, Wagner's interesting, distasteful in a lot of ways, but it's clear that Tolkien despised him and he was like, well, I'm going to do this story the way I want to do it. Now, they're both taking from German folklore, but it's so clear in certain cases that Tolkien is almost making fun of Wagner in a lot of ways. Um, Even though he denied it his whole life. I mean, what was the line? The only similarity between the two rings is that they're round. I'm like, yes, it is, JR. Keep it, don't, you can be all JD Salinger about it. We'll like you more.
Um, so maybe you could chat a little bit about the differences or the similarities between being a stand-up comedian and being a cartoonist, the page versus the stage. Because I know I've observed it so many times that there's some cartoonists that just can't help it. They also want to be stand-up comedians, or they even want to be burlesque dancers. They want to express themselves somehow, but then I think a lot of them, or most of them, come back to being cartoonists at the end of the day.
You had a little foray into stand up too, didn't you?
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. I think of it as a sport, and I'm fascinated by how I can, if I really get into the right frame of mind, memorize the lines I need to memorize. And it's like a conversation, basically, because you know what you want to talk to with a friend. So you already have, a lot of people, they already have memorized more than they realize. They know they want to say all this stuff to their friends. So they already have a comedy act. You can think of it that way, already in their head.
Well, to go over a couple of things that you were talking about, the one difference about cartooning, which will always be my first love, it's my first art. I was talking about earlier how everything else came out of it, but I like performing, and there's no performance aspect of cartooning. I remember a Too Much Coffee strip, a Too Much Coffee Man strip Shannon Wheeler did, where it's like, who do you imagine watching you? Or what do you imagine people reading your comments? Like, I imagine a full stadium of people watching me and cheering when I complete every page. You might get popular if you're lucky or if you're good, but comics are never going to be that. They're a very personal, creative endeavor, and they're also a very personal reading experience. I'd say even more than a novel, it's so much the conversation just between the artist and the reader. Um, because in a novel, the reader has a lot more freedom. They can, if you say your grandmother, you're going to think of your own. The reader's going to think of their own grandmother. If I draw a grandmother, they're going to see the exact one I draw. Um, I've heard stories about, Japanese grade schoolers reading riotously funny manga on the train, and maybe this is just the Japanese being Japanese, and you wouldn't know it. Their face is deadpan, but you'll ask them, it's like, that's the funniest manga I've ever read. And I think it's partially because it's just so personal. You know what I mean? It's just your brain and the page. But I love performing. I'm a middle child, for Christ's sake, in a very loud artistic family. I've got all my musical instruments right here, all lined up. You get a lot of juice from that. Most even at a convention, I don't think a lot of cartoonists get that, and it's nice to have if you can find the time. That said, I was always a god awful stand up. I was much better at improv, and more than that, I think improv's given me more that I use in comics. You know, because in stand up, you're just talking. You're standing up there and talking. With improv, there's a little bit of an acting aspect to it. And I only started to think, okay, how does this character stand when they're feeling this way? Or how does this character stand just because that's their personality? And I only really started thinking about that in my comics when I started doing improv.
Well, let's segue over to Small Press Expo. Did you find yourself at all using your expressiveness during the convention, or what happened to you at Small Press Expo this time around?
I had a great time. Made my money back selling comics for the
Oh, that's
table, which I've
great.
only done once before in my life, which was wonderful. Um, where that comes across, I mean, I feel like I grew up a lot in Philadelphia comedy and, the late Bush, early Obama administration. Like a lot of cartoonists, I think I had a little bit of Arrested Development, and it's almost a second swipe at high school. Um, Stand up attracts a lot of people who like to talk and not hear people back. Improv is all about listening, and listening sometimes is
Oh,
even completely. Even when someone's not talking, you should be listening to their body language, even with an audience. Um, and it also removes a lot of anxiety about talking to people, something a lot of cartoonists have based on what we were saying about before. We don't have a social component until the cons. Um, I got so much juice of meeting other cartoonists. That's something I wish I knew earlier. That when you're 18, you're like, I want to become the best cartoonist in the world. I want fans. You will always be better served finding comrades than fans. You know what I mean? People
yeah.
who can critique your work, can say, hey, you want to be in this anthology? We're just friends who you can talk about this stuff with. And look, I've had people who like my work a lot. I can never say I've had a lot of fans, but I've met some beautiful people. And I met so many great people at SPX, and I used what I learned from improv to, you show up the night before at the meet and greet, and you actually meet and greet. You don't just sit down there with your drink hoping someone talks. You're just like, hey, what's your name? What do you draw? And, that's less being funny than it's, just the social aptitude. I feel like I finally picked up doing improv and stand up comedy, talking to those guys, even if not on stage. That said, uh, I do talk to people at the con who come by the table. I feel like I'm good at that. You can talk to people about what kind of comics they like, etc. But to use another comic trope or a manga trope, you're not much of a manga fan, are you? Are you?
Yes, I think it's better to say yes because I'll think about this a day later and say, wait, I've read this, I've read that. I'm not somebody who just no manga. What there's a whole thing going on about manga and anime I could tell you about. What I've observed is that there's one academic after another will say, I'm not a manga person. What does that really mean? Because manga is comic. So yes, I am a fan of manga.
I love it all. I love French comics or just Euro comics in general. I love British comics, as heavily drawn as they are. American, as long as it's comics, I'll read it. But the reason I bring up manga in the context of a con, though, is if you've ever read Lone Wolf and Cub, one of the most beautiful comics ever drawn, even if the storyline sometimes gets into Canon Pictures B movie stuff. Um, it's a samurai comic, and they've got all the tropes of samurai comics, and one of them is that when you're in battle, you should always try to suppress your death lust, because if you don't reflect someone's death lust back to them, they cannot cut you. And I always feel at the con, I'm always trying to suppress wanting people to buy my work. And I'm like, damn it, if I could just suppress this buy lust, I'd be a lot more approachable. Long way around
Yeah,
to that one.
yeah. Well, I've noticed certain patterns. There's always the person who picks up the book, starts to look through it, starts to literally read it, skim here and there. Before that, they've had enough time to get maybe a little bit too much of a sampling of the book. So I don't know. That's part of the goal of the cartoon is to defy that, to make the comic almost you couldn't read it at one standing. I think that that's kind of always in the back of my mind. I have to make this comic where it's not something you could read it in just one standing. There's too many things going on. I don't know if you even think like that.
I actually think the exact opposite way. Um, I told you earlier that when I was younger, you want fans, you want to be the top, you want to sell 1 million books, you want to be Eastman and Laird, Teenage Mutant Turtles, just everything like that. And okay, maybe that happens to people. I don't think it happens to very many people anymore now that media isn't a monolith, and it's all fragmented and everything like that. It's nice to sell a lot of con. It's nice to make your table money back. But I think the real point is number one, seeking comrades and also seeking connection with people. Um, okay, maybe they go up and they read and everything like that and have a conversation, and maybe they don't buy. Uh, uh, Maybe they know my work a little bit better, and maybe we have a nice conversation, and then maybe they remember me and check out my stuff online. I almost view the cons as more of a promotional thing than a selling tool now. And to that end, we will talk about. I guess one of the reasons I'm talking about manga so much is I just did a manga influenced comics. These mini comics. This is May the Master. This is my most recent one. It's a short story, but if you notice, it's a mini comic. These things I print them up for a quarter, and I give them away. That's totally free. I know I've got the luxury of having a nice day job. I mean, I wish I could spend more time drawing comics, so I can blow some money on the con. Steve Albini's quote, before he was able to make a living doing what he did, was a lot of people have a day job to support a family. I've got a day job to support my art. That's how I feel. And that guy who comes up and reads and then puts down, so he puts it down and like, hey, why don't you take this? It's free. And even if he doesn't read it, I've had this happen to me a couple times. I get an email from someone saying it's like, yeah, I was in the back of my friend's car and I found this little comic you drew. He doesn't remember where it came from, but I really liked it. It's yeah. Who knows? Maybe I'm just making excuses for not being the greatest indie comic in the world. Which who is that? Like, again, even the height of Daniel Klaus when he was doing my favorite work of him, I don't think that like he was living the high life or something like that. But
Right.
I think it's more gratifying and useful to find the connection rather than, oh man, I sold that guy a book. I'd rather give 100 guys a mini comic. But of course, again, this is me. Clearly I'm hiding something because I'm like, I want to suppress that. I want people to buy my work.
Well, I don't want to come across as a bad person. It was like just a pet peeve. It's not every person because I give stuff away at a drop of a hat. If somebody's like they really are enjoying it, enjoying their energy. There was this one person, Jennifer and I were at Comic-Con, and she just seemed so taken by uh, the book I'm promoting, And I just said, if you really want it, you could have it. And she just, it freaked her out. It completely freaked her out. She couldn't wrap her mind around that. And finally we convinced her, no, it's okay. It's really okay. You can have it. So I go back and forth, but the guy that I'm thinking of is somebody who was literally, he was reading the whole thing, and he just gave me this look, say, I'm gonna have to think about it. You don't have to think about it. You already read it, man. So I do have a point there. I can go all over the map. I can feel these feelings of resentment, and then they melt away, and I'm the most giving person. I got a whole bunch of free stuff. I totally understand the concept of the mini comic, and that when you expect it to give out free or for a nominal amount, and then you spend all this money on stickers, and you give some of those away, and prints that becomes a little more touchy because they can become expensive. But you know, I might give a print away. It depends on how I feel.
I'm going to say something flippant because I find it funny, but if I ever do reach a certain point, I'm sure it's going to come back and haunt me. Um, I think the probably best compliment I could receive was someone wanting to steal one of my comics. If they want it that bad, then oh, that's a fan. But again, I'm joking about that. Going back to your earlier point, I hope you don't think I was thinking that I was accusing you of being a bad
No,
person.
no, no.
A lot of different things can be true at the same time, and I like a conversation where either there's a difference of opinion or one person's just taking another side than me. I mean, okay, so I'm an engineer. I've worked in, let's just say I've traveled the South and I've worked with a lot of blue collar guys. I am very far left wing. I am a socialist, but you get a different perspective talking to those guys if you don't talk down to them. Especially when you realize that they've never been engaged in that specific way. Uh, I always say when I disagree with someone, my weak ideas die and my strong ideas get stronger.
Yeah, there you go. No, there's well, not to get off on a tangent, but yeah, I know what you mean. And like, there's somebody, let's say that he was diametrically opposed to my politics, but I thought of him as like a really good coworker, buddy. So I didn't care about his politics. We'd have fun with it. We'd had fun with our differences because he didn't agree with my politics. I didn't agree with his, but at the end of the day, we liked each other's company. And so, we have to get more into that as, like the talking heads have been saying endlessly, we have to get to more civility.
Well, I don't want to get too deep into
Oh, I
politics, but
know, I know.
I feel the most radical thing I can say to people like that is, well, I'm a liberal because they're so programmed to think that, you've got three heads and you're breathing fire. And then they're like, you're talking to me and I like you. And you see, you're not changing them over completely to your side, but you see like a little rock crumble down the cliff. And, occasionally you get your mind changed too. And before anyone thinks I'm talking about terrible stuff, you hear all of those guys complain about corruption a whole lot. Corruption, corruption. You just think it's like what you mean when you mean corruption, what they
Hmm.
talk about. As in Lake Charles, Louisiana. And, you know, um, this guy was complaining about corruption, there. And I said what a Indian engineer had told me before, when we were sitting around talking about this, of course, engineers talking about corruption. He just like sort of slyly says, you guys don't have corruption. We've got to bribe someone if we want a driver's license, which I thought was a funny phrase to, defeat that sort of thing. And I tell it to this guy, and he fires back to me about everything that they've gone through, about the terrible way the insurance companies, repaired the casinos first, wouldn't pay out any money for actual rebuilding from the hurricanes they have down there. And, I shut up. It's like, oh, I'm wrong. Yeah, that's the type of corruption you're talking about, and you've actually experienced it. So I altered a bit. But let's get off of politics.
Oh,
I
sure.
wanted to hedge my bets when I said I listen to these people that I was like, oh, well, I won't even get into that sort of stuff, but you understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah, and it's not just one country or one culture. It's corruption goes by different names and methods. So, but I wanted to see if we can get over to May the Master for a sec. Okay, so now we are in May the Master mode, and I'll let you do a little intro because basically it's a fun little fight story, and the underdogs they somehow find a way to do the impossible. What can you tell us about May the Master?
Well, I will tell you that, as I said, I just finished that really long novel, the prose one, over COVID, along with The Atheist Guide to the Old Testament. Very, very heavy books. Anytime I finish one of those, I just want to draw a fun fight scene. And as is pretty clear, I love all comics, but I love manga. And specifically, I realized recently what a genius Akira Toriyama was. And I actually read some, Akira Toriyama, the guy who did Dragon Ball, always said he took it from Journey to the West, the Chinese novel. But there were these pulp kung fu novels that were being released in Hong Kong called Legend of Condor Heroes by, I think the guy's name was Louis Cha. Jin Yong. One of them is a pen name. But it's so clear that Akira Toriyama was more influenced by these kung fu novels than he was by Journey to the West. And they released them in English. I read them, and they're so amazing. And it made me want to draw a kung fu battle really badly, especially with all this heavy prose work, which drawing is fun, guys. Prose, I can do it, and I'm proud of it, but it is not fun.
Yeah, I can
So,
imagine.
yeah, exactly. Please interrupt me whenever I do, again, middle child, tend to talk myself a blue streak.
No,
But,
no.
you don't want to just draw a pastiche. You don't want to just draw your Dragon Ball. So the thing is I draw comics. I told you I did stand up. I play music. I do a lot of things, and I love them. I've made great friends. I'm proud of what I do, but I really haven't got off of first base with a lot of it. And strangely enough, I got that from Dragon Ball. If your fans have ever watched the cartoon or read the comic, they know that like the main character is this guy Goku, and there's a bunch of villains that come in, and you know, he's always weaker than them at first, and then he trains really hard and he beats them. And the weird thing about a lot of Japanese comics is that when the hero beats the villain, they become friends, and the villain kind of joins their entourage. It's almost as if Batman beat the Joker in the first issue of Batman. Um, and he stuck around in the comics, but instead of being a villain, he just became Batman's buddy. Still the Joker, still dressed, still act, but this time he was fighting for good, which is a really interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
Um, but it's also, the hero Goku in Dragon Ball always surpasses them to the point that some of these characters who were, you know, amazing powers. You know what I mean? Like people who could literally, destroy the earth if they wanted to, are suddenly relegated to like second, third, fourth tier joke status. And that gave me really the feels about, especially my life as stand up comedy, about like devoting your life to this art that you love so badly and never getting off first base. You know what I mean? You love an art that it just doesn't love you back. And that's what I wanted to do with May the Master. Again, people who know Dragon Ball, the thought was it's like Yamcha, one of the greatest fighters in the world, literally could knock out Tyson, and he's a joke. So this is about characters who aren't even Yamcha. They're just Originally the title of it was going to be Rank before I took the advice of someone who said just always name your comic up after the name character, because just people who are trying to make it as martial artists, trying to be heroes. This goes back to our earlier conversation, and they've got day jobs. They there's a character in this. The villain in this is called Stone Caesar, and he is the version, I would say, of a road comic in kung fu terms. Like, he does it, he makes a living, but he is not living a good life, and he's not good at what he does. And he's very much trying to defend his clout against all of these essential open mic comedians. Essentially, I feel like I'm saying the word essentially a lot. The kung fu world, or the Wulin in this, is just the Philadelphia comedy community as I remember it.
Well, like I say in my review, you're doing what you love, and you know, any cartoonist, even on a professional, would kill to have your day job, just to have the income, the professional status, all the good stuff that comes with having you know, a nice job.
I do envy, not envy, that's the wrong word. I do owe Evan Dorkin a drink if I ever see him. It was really him being like showing you how bad the life of an indie cartoonist is. That was like, well, I'm good at math. I can do this on weekends.
Yep, most cartoonists are not so good at math. So,
Yes, I got lucky. I'm not good with women though, so that's
well,
that's the trade.
I think you got a bright future, no matter any way you look at it. And you know, the cartoonists who really make it, it's a relatively small group. So I
It's
mean,
like go ahead.
it's like you can't win situations. So you have to take it as a labor of love first, and then you go from there. As you know, as you well know.
Look, he did bad things and was justly punished, but Louis C.K. had a great line with it. Even there's about 10 people who make it in stand-up comedy in the world. Even if you become the top of it and become the best comedian in the world for a period of time, as he was, then you're just fighting to stay relevant, and the competition isn't even over. You're competing with history at that point. Um, it's best to just love what you do. Compare and despair. You know what I mean? Take the pleasure out of it. You're getting at the time. Enjoy the path. And I don't know if the characters in May and the Master will ever get to that point, which I thankfully have eventually, because it's kind of fun to torture them and give them thoughts that I maybe had a decade or two about various arts. But yeah, I'm much happier with my art now and about my art that I've reached that point. You can just take joy in the doing of it and the object once it's done.
Well, I want to give you the opportunity to tell us anything else that I might have missed that you'd like to share with folks, your upcoming projects. The novel, that's still a little bit ways away, isn't it? Or what would you like to add?
Well, I'll just say what I've got out now. May the Master is currently being serialized in color on my website, www.hypnospiralcomic.com. That's comic, not comics. That should be done pretty soon. Go visit my website. The novel actually is very close. It's done. It's finished. I just want to draw a chapter illustration, so there will be a slight graphic component to that for that. But once I'm done with May the Master, I will start posting that chapter by chapter once more on my website. If you see me in person, I can give you a May the Master mini. Good reason to see me at a con. Right after that, this version, you can currently find The Atheist Guide to the Old Testament. You can buy this on my website. Once I finish May the Master in color and the novel, which will be called Star Touched, posting them. So maybe spring, summer next year. This will be being posted online in color on my website as well. Once more, www.hypnospiralcomic.com.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Jake, and we'll just do this again sometime.